Hello, everyone. My name is Michel, and thank you very much for joining us today to listen to Catherine Hamilton, who will give us an update on red light therapy and its potential benefits for people with Parkinson's. So this is a follow-up session to our highly successful previous interview with Catherine, which was in September 2021, and that has attracted 23,000 views on our YouTube channel. This was the most popular video of all. Catherine is a retired medical practitioner and the author of the Red Lights on the Brain blog. She co-founded Well Red Limited, the company that produces the Coronet red light hat. I would like to remind everyone that this session is for information and education purposes only. So if you are seeking medical advice, as I always tell you, please consult a medical professional. There will be time for questions at the end of this presentation. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I would ask you to not use the chat function for questions, as I will not see those questions. So use the Q&A. For those of you who don't know us yet, Silver Bullet is a Parkinson's support group managed by Mark Lambert and myself. Mark is on the video, as you can see. And we want to help you to become well-informed journalists in your condition and to make informed choices on how to adapt your lifestyle to slow down disease progression. That is what our goal is. We are organizing Zoom sessions with researchers and PD specialists to update you on the latest advances in science and medicine, nutrition, exercise, and wellness. We also post the recordings of our sessions on YouTube and on Spotify more recently, and I invite you to subscribe to those channels so that you are informed when we post new content. Details are available in the chat section at the bottom of your screen. But let's come back to today's topic and to Catherine Hamilton, who will give us an update on red light therapy and its potential benefits for people with Parkinson's. Hello, Catherine. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us today.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you for the introduction.
So
I think I might just leap into it.
Yes, I just wanted to say that actually for everyone to understand that the session today is meant to be an update rather than a repetition of the previous interview. So we're not going to cover exactly the same ground, but we just thought it would be useful to update everyone and recap on the science behind red light therapy and the benefits. So we will start by doing that, and then we'll get to address some other questions. Sorry, Catherine, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen now. I'm not very good at this. Yay!
Here you go. It's working perfectly well.
Is it working? Great.
Yes,
okay.
Perfectly well.
So I wanted to show you this slide. This is the very first one to show, in case you think that red light therapy and photobiomodulation is something new, newfangled thing that is really a bit suspicious. In fact, it's a very old-fangled thing. And you can see here a patient, CB, who has smallpox. So in 1895 in Copenhagen, Professor Niels Finsen had become very interested in light. And he was the first to separate out the different wavelengths of light. And he postulated that red light would reduce inflammation and would reduce the effect of smallpox on people's faces. All the scarring that you get as a result of smallpox is pretty significant. And so he persuaded the Copenhagen a smallpox hospital. There was one devoted just to smallpox then, to allow him to try something on patient CB. And that was to set up a room just with red lights. And so only red lights were shone on this lady. If she wanted to read, well, she had to read by red light. The nurses, when they brought in her meals and checked on it, they had to make sure they were in the red light as well. So you can see as a result of a bit over 3 weeks of just red light nonstop, no daylight, no fluorescent lights or whatever, she had none of those lesions anymore, nor did she have any scarring, nor did she get any infections in them. Most people with smallpox would get infections in those vesicles, a bit like chickenpox. And they then would cause quite nasty scarring, but this lady didn't. Unfortunately, he might have invented, being able to separate wavelengths of light, but he didn't invent the after photo. So we've only got the before photo. And he published this in the British Medical Journal in 1895. And those of you who are looking closely, you'll see that the British Medical Journal managed to misspell his name. I guess they didn't think that anyone could be called Niels rather than Neil. Anyway, so just shows this has been around a long time. time. We're just taking notice of it now. So today's researchers, particularly in the area of Parkinson's, and I've mentioned these last time, on the left is Professor John Mitrofanos, and on the right, Professor Alim Benavid. John Mitrofanos has been researching Parkinson's for the last 20-odd years. And quite a number of years ago, he'd realised that the problem in Parkinson's in the basal ganglia, in those cells that are supposed to produce dopamine, is that they'd run out of steam, that the mitochondria, the cell batteries, were not working properly. And so he had a look around to see what could stimulate mitochondria to work better. And he was told that red light might, 670 nanometers, a very nice deep red colour, had the effect of stimulating mitochondria and getting them to work normally. Well, his reaction was, what? This is weird. So he was given the information by Professor Jonathan Stone, who's the first on the list there. So he's a physiology professor, so he knew something. And so he started experimenting using laboratory animals with induced Parkinson's, and found that, in fact, he could improve, if not cure, the Parkinson's in the mice. And so he then had a collaboration with Professor Benavid, who was at Grenoble University. And of course, he's the man who developed the deep brain stimulation. So he knows a thing or two about Parkinson's. And they have, in fact, developed an intracranial light. So there are also some activity here in Tasmania, and I've mentioned some names. And on the left there, you'll see my name. And down the bottom is the Red Lights on the Brain blog. That's a useful resource for you. So let's do some definitions. So photobiomodulation is not a word that Niels Finsen used back in 1895, but it's a modern word meaning or defined as the therapeutic use of red and near-infrared light. So wavelengths of around 600 nanometers, which is just getting into the orangey red colour, up to 1,000 nanometers, which is, we can't see it. Once it gets past about 880 nanometers, we really can't see it. So, and I've marked two wavelengths there. 670 nanometers is a very important one, as is 810. John Mitrofanos' research into Parkinson's and light show that these two wavelengths are very significant. So, in brief, and apologies if this sounds too brief, but hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a bit more later about mechanisms. The first thing about red and near-infrared light in that wavelength band is that it stimulates the mitochondria, the cell batteries. And this sets up a whole range of chemical activities in different areas. The first area is to protect, to improve the health of the cell. The cell has inbuilt mechanisms to self-care, to look after itself, but it needs energy to do that. And once the mitochondria have got a burst of energy given to them by the light, then the cell can get cracking and do all the things to improve the quality of its cell and make sure all its bits are operating properly. So that's called neuroprotection. It also sets off a cascade of changes in the nucleus of the cell, so that it prepares the cell to start generating new ones. So that's neurogenesis. Now, I think I said before, when I went to medical school, once you'd lost brain cells, that was it. You're never going to get them back again. Seems that was completely wrong, thank goodness. So we can get new cells made, and light stimulates the making of new brain cells. It also stimulates the creation of new blood vessels. They kind of start sprouting around the area where the light's been. And that's great because you get more oxygen delivered to the area, and also you get more glucose delivered there. And both of those are really needed by the cell. It reduces brain inflammation and inflammation around the cells as well. That's yet another series of cascades of chemical activities that result from that stimulation of the mitochondria. And of course, no cell works on its own in the brain. They all work in concert. So when you've got a whole bunch, a network, say, of memory cells, the light seems to help the network work better, a bit like a flock of birds. They all kind of take more notice of each other, and they tend to go in the same direction rather than spreading out and being a bit disorderly. And the last one's interesting too. It stimulates or enhances a rubbish removal system. So in our brain, we get rubbish. We get cells and we get proteins particularly proteins that get laid down in and outside the cells. And somehow the brain's got to get rid of them because they can really clutter up the works. There is a great system for doing that in sleep. And it seems that red light and near infrared light stimulate that rubbish removal system, which means that you're not going to get the accumulation of alpha-synuclein in Parkinson's and amyloid in Alzheimer's. Pretty handy, that. So some critical features and properties of red and near infrared light. And again, this is just that band of wavelengths, is that firstly, it can penetrate into the outer part of the brain. And you can see on the top there, there's light as a single point. Can you see that? Maybe not. A single point of light onto the brain.
Yes,
you can see light gets in. The red means, sorry?
We can see it. We can see it.
Oh, good. Okay. And then next to it, you can see if you put light all over the head, it actually penetrates a whole lot more. So a single point source of light will get a bit of light in. You know, we will get some penetration, but you get an awful lot more if you have lights all over the head. So it can penetrate. Now, depending on which article you read, it can penetrate into the brain tissues 2 centimetres, maybe up to 4. Now, naturally, I prefer the research that says it can get up to 4 centimetres, but even if it's only 2 centimetres and 4 centimetres, I'm getting my millimetres and centimetres muddled up, sorry. So 2 centimetres is great. 4 centimetres is even better. Anything in between is also pretty good. So you do get a lot of light directly on the cells in the outer part of the brain, and those cells respond extremely well. There's also an indirect effect, and you can see this graphic here, which is one of Professor John Mitrofanas's. On the left, you've got the direct stimulation on the cells in the outer part of the brain, which I've described. But as well, you've got what's called the indirect or abscopal effect of lights, of red and near infrared lights. And this was first described by Dan Johnson, who's one of John Mitrofanas's team in the Mitrofanas laboratory. And at first it was thought it had to be something in the circulation. So they thought it was probably one or more of immune cells, you know, the white cells whizzing around, and maybe stem cells somehow would pick up a photon of light and take it and drop it somewhere where it was needed. But then, of course, came the news that mitochondria can be wanderers. They can pop outside of a cell, wander around the bloodstream, and then pop into another cell. No one knows how that works and what controls it. And I have a vision of a supervisor, sort of mitochondrial supervisor with his clipboard here, and he said, to one mitochondria, "Get out of that muscle cell, please. I want you to hop in the bloodstream, go to the basal ganglia, entrance 3, level B12, and go into the first neuron on the left." And then he'll give more messages to others. But however bizarre that sounds, it's something like that is going on, except we don't know how it's happening, because we get swarming of immune cells and mitochondria who picked up the light dose from the red and near infrared light exposure, and then they take it to the cell where it's needed and then drop it in. This explains some of the improvements in Parkinson's, because we know that the light will not penetrate right down into the basal ganglia, but obviously something's getting there and something is doing something useful. So in summary, you're looking at the motor symptoms or motor signs of Parkinson's as a result of using transcranial light. There's improved hand control and finger dexterity, the kind of tests that you do. We see improvements in that. Speech improves, the clarity of articulation and the voice quality. These are all motor. The external internal tremor improves, particularly internal tremors. So that can make quite a big difference. Gait improves, and facial animation, instead of being quite blank, you start getting animation back again. And of course, the non-motor symptoms. This is the area that I'm really, really interested in, because they don't tend to get talked about that much. Everyone's focused on the movement. So the big ones are the fatigue, sleep quality, depression, anxiety, apathy, attention, concentration and judgment, auditory and visual processing, sense of smell and constipation, and a whole bunch of others as well. These improve as a result of transcranial lights. And it's thought because a lot of the control of things like energy levels in fatigue and mood and anxiety and apathy are in the cortex, in those areas that gets the direct light. I'm fascinated by auditory and visual processing. It's quite lovely when I get emails from people who've been using a light hat, whether they've made it themselves or one of the coronets. They'll tell me that they can now read books again. This is not unusual. And that's because they can concentrate. Their visual ability is able to kind of focus, and they can remember the page instead of reading the one page over and over. They can just keep going. It's really lovely. Same with auditory processing, which is really important in social gatherings. Sense of smell. Some people seem to respond incredibly well and get their smell back. Other people seem to get small improvements. Still others, absolutely none. It's really hard to measure unless you do the right tests. Okay, so here are a few other things that I think are really important, as well as the other non-motor things, is joy and awe, the ability to find joy in life, and hedonia. Parkinson's causes anhedonia, where there's no joy, there's no capacity for joy and awe, that kind of moment when you're breathless with amazement and delight. That ability is taken away. Lights bring that back. It brings back the sense of creativity and even colour. Some people lose their colour, ability to see colour in Parkinson's. And I've had people with using transcranial lights who got their colour sense back. So literally, the world has coloured up again instead of being grey. And social engagement improves as well. And that's partly because of the auditory processing thing, meaning you can interpret what someone says to you more quickly, but it's also something to do with all the emotional response and so on going on in the brain. So all that means that instead of being kind of alienated from people and not wanting to engage socially, it's much easier to do that once you start the lights. And the sense of self is another important one. That people tell me that I feel like me again, and I've got my personality back. And having not realised that it had gone, it's quite a shock to people to realise that their essential selves have kind of been taken away through this process. It's a rotten disease. It's a rotten, sneaky disease. It has so many nasty little tentacles. So I just want to make this comment based on the last presentation to No Silver Bullet in Parkinson's, and that was Professor Baz Blom, who's just amazing. And if you think about the importance of exercise in Parkinson's, as he described so brilliantly, there are obstacles that the Parkinson's symptoms can put in the way of exercising. Apathy is a big one, depression, cognition, being able to understand what exercises you're being asked to do. Anxiety and fatigue and sleep problems can all impact on your ability and your desire and your determination to take up and keep going with exercise. These things are improved by transcranial lights. So you can get a double whammy with lights. You get the improvements in these things, and then those obstacles start to reduce and exercise becomes possible. It's really important thing, because exercise in itself, as Professor Bloom said, is really, it can make a big difference, and is also neuroprotective. Whoops. So, in summary, okay, there's increasing evidence, and a good evidence, that lights, transcranial lights, make a difference. They are effective, they're safe, and they're easy to use, and they don't have side effects, unless you describe getting a bit more hair growing on your head as a side effect. So the transcranial red and near infrared lights improve the motor and non-motor symptoms and signs of Parkinson's disease. And they improve symptoms for which current treatment is either non-existent or problematic. There's no treatment for fatigue. There's no effective treatment for sleep problems, whereas you can get improvements in these things with just sticking lights on your head twice a day. Parkinson's disease symptoms that are obstacles to exercise, those obstacles can be reduced, which makes exercise possible. And once you kind of get going on it, it's a bit self-fulfilling. You can keep going on it, and that in itself is neuroprotective as well as the lights. The non-motor symptoms I whizzed through before, they're really important because they're the main ones that affect quality of life for the person with Parkinson's, but also for the carer and for the close family members. Things like depression and apathy and sleep problems. If they're improved, then the life of the partner and family is so much better. Now, I'm making the next statement based on my observations of watching people with Parkinson's using transcranial lights for the last 7 years. It really does slow the disease progression. Now, I can't give you a chapter and verse about that, but it's really what I've seen, and certainly what people are telling me as they've been using the lights. And it's certainly clear that the earlier you can use transcranial lights, the better. It does matter. You make them yourself. You can get a coronet. It doesn't matter. And I'll give you my blog information at the end, so that you can go there to get the information for making your own. But the earlier they're started, the better. But anyone at any stage in Parkinson's can get improvement. And I've seen, here in Tasmania, I've gone and fitted people up with coronets, and a few people have been really, really well down the Parkinson's disease progressions. And I'll wander back in a few weeks and to see what's been happening. And definitely there are improvements. It's not a cure, but it can really, really make a difference to quality of life and slow the progression. Whoops. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you so much. Yes, as you said, there is no silver bullet, but this is one of the things that can help some people. I just wanted to revisit one aspect that you have covered already partly, is the fact that less than you perhaps, but have been following research on red light therapy quite assiduously. And I see researchers and scientists who are very much supporting the red light therapy treatments and the effect it can have. But there are also some detractors among the scientists who basically say the light does not penetrate the skull. Can you just elaborate a tiny bit on what would be your answer to this, so that audience can have a full picture? Yeah,
fair enough. Look, when I first got interested in this in 2015, I was totally obsessed with getting the light down into the substantia nigra pars compacta as well, down deep in the basal ganglia. That's the way to go, because that's where the problem is. And I've learned that, yes, that might have been where it all started. But of course, by the time you get symptoms of Parkinson's disease, 80% or so of the cells that produce dopamine in this area have died. And by that stage, all the knock-on effects have really started to make themselves known. So in the brain, like the human body, everything's connected to everything else. So if you have a dopamine producing cells that are no longer producing dopamine, then the next stage in the brain, the filter, area, which sorts out the messages and works out where they're meant to go, will get this garbled message because the dopamine levels haven't enabled that message to be very clear. And that, you know, the filter will look and say, you really want me to send that? And, you know, so the basal ganglia says, you know, it's the best we can do. And so garbled messages get sent out, and then eventually the whole of the brain gets some aberrations. That then has an impact on the quality and the function and the health of the, you know, the downstream cells, particularly those in the cortex. And so when, you know, just because it starts in the basal ganglia doesn't mean that the problems are only in the basal ganglia. The problems are everywhere in all parts of the brain. And you remember I talked about the direct effect of light, you know, that 2 centimeters plus of cells on the outer part of the brain. They get direct light, which means all those, and that's a cortex actually, that's really handy because they do so much controlling of things. It really looks like that it does seem to look, it does look like it extends the effectiveness of the remaining dopamine, because I've seen people who've been able to go for longer without needing their dose. You know, people who had to be really rigid with their dopaminergic medication could now kind of relax and not have to have it at 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever, you know. And some have even skipped ones without realizing it. I'm not telling anyone to do that, by the way. I'm just saying that's kind of happened with people with lights. So clearly there's some improvement in the way the dopamine that's remaining is being used. But you also see changes in people who first put the lights on. I remember one guy who was a former footballer here in Australia. His speech started to improve within about 10 minutes of using the coronet. It having been really mumbly and difficult to hear, it was faster and you could hear him better. So I was just fascinated to see this, and it lasted for about half an hour after the lights finished, and then it kind of went back. So obviously there was immediate motor improvement, because the motor circuit, the cortex is up here and gets direct light from the coronet. So obviously that was doing something. What else? The indirect effect. I think people don't realise just how important that can be, and that's where, you know, you've got the immune cells and the mitochondria that wander around the bloodstream and pick up a light pulse and take it elsewhere. That can be really significant in some people, particularly for those who are in early onset and early part of their disease progression. There's also bone marrow in the skull. And so whenever you stick lights on bone marrow, you're giving them a jolly good energizing kind of dose. And as well as that, fairly recent research has shown that blood cells have the ability, there's a back door that allows them to get into the brain. Everyone thought that they couldn't possibly get past the blood-brain barrier, and that's true, but they've got their own little kind of entrance way back here, and so they whiz in. And when you think about bone marrow stem cells, you know, that's quite handy. So that might be where some of the useful stem cells are coming from. This is just postulation at the moment, but obviously something is happening. I guess the final clincher, though, is if it didn't work, then people wouldn't stick lights on their head twice a day. If it were just the basal ganglia that you had to, you know, get the lights to, then people would definitely not improve, but they do. And you wouldn't keep wearing the stupid lights on their head every day if you didn't get some benefit from it. I mean, when we're not stupid, any of us. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No, that's very complete and comprehensive. I just wanted to ask you whether there still is a lot of research going on, and since we spoke in September 2021, has there been, from a scientific and research standpoint, new findings or new articles published that you want to highlight?
Yeah. Look, there's been some really interesting stuff. One of the areas that I just find fascinating is the concept of biophotons. It seems that cells can generate light themselves, and one of the main wavelengths they use is that red I was talking about before, 670 nanometers, that lovely visible red color. It seems that they use that wavelength to talk to each other, to communicate. And there's also a blue wavelength that they use. And I mean, this is early days yet, but it looks like when a neuron sort of pumps out a red pulse, it's saying to another neuron, isn't it a great day? I'm feeling fantastic today. Whereas if it pops out a blue one, it means, I'm not feeling very well. Okay, so this is a bit, obviously we don't know much about it, and I certainly don't. But it's the wavelength they use, the pulse frequency, the power, all those sorts of things can be detected by other neurons, and they can understand the message that means. But the fact that cells use this wavelength themselves and it's associated with cell health is, I think, significant, and another kind of tick as to why photobiomodulation works. So that's one area. Another one is in sleep. We've got a lot more understanding now of what happens when we sleep and why sleep is important. And we literally, remember I was talking about garbage collection and getting rid of the sort of the toxins before. As proteins break down and then fragments get left in the brain, they do need to be cleaned out. And there are scavenger cells that wander around, scoop them up, a bit like Pac-Man. If you're old like me, you can remember playing Pac-Man. And then they take them to another area, and they stick their feet outside so that they can eject the proteins into the bloodstream. That's amazing, isn't it? I have visions of gumboots sort of going into the stream and squirting out these things. So now, if you don't do that, that's a problem. You get a buildup of in alpha-synuclein, particularly in Parkinson's, but also amyloid in Parkinson's, and obviously in Alzheimer's as well. So what lights seem to do is to stimulate, improve that, it's called the glymphatic system, improve the way that stuff can be taken out, which means that you can have a cleaner brain at the end of a night's sleep after when you use lights regularly compared to not using them. You still get detritus left in there if you don't use lights. So even if it's just to have a clean brain, lights are worth it. My experience is not so much scientific. It's just been working with people with young onset Parkinson's, and I'm pretty sure that they are very responsive to lights. And so from the people I've been working with, I think it's a pretty interesting area. And obviously, we need to get more into that. They tend to have been ignored in terms of research and attention. Now, two small things I just want to tell you about, which are personal things I've noticed, is that I got COVID in June, and I remember, you have to ring up the health department here, when you get COVID, and they sent out a kit to measure your temperature, all that sort of stuff. And I remember on the phone to them, and they were asking me really basic questions, and I couldn't answer them, even the simplest question. And it finally dawned that there was something wrong with my brain. It wasn't just, that I felt very unwell from COVID, but, my brain was really not working very well. So it was literally zooming over to get the Coronet. And I used it quite a few times each day over the next few weeks, and it really improved the brain fog. So that's an N=1, but it was quite interesting. It was very frightening being in the middle of that fog. I can tell you, it scared the living daylights out of me. And then I got to tell you about, we live in the bush, and this time of year, it's after all the rain, there are lots of leeches around. And last year I got a nasty leech bite, and I always get an inflammatory reaction to it. And then the other day, my husband got one as well. So we were checking to see whether he had the same reaction as I did to red light. So you get a swelling in the redness, you know, all that, and you want to itch it, you know, you want to scratch it to death because it's so uncomfortable. Shine red light on it, and within a minute, the redness starts to kind of fade a little bit, but you can see the thing reducing in size and fluid, serum coming out. I mean, it is bizarre. So obviously something really useful is happening there. It also takes away the itch. Red lights have been used in wound management for a long time, and a lot of work has been going on in burns management as well. So there's obviously something they're doing. I can't explain it, but if you ever get a leech bite, definitely put red lights on it. There you go.
Remember it, although I think that in the UK and in Oxford, we're probably safe, but you never know. With the change in climate, I might have that problem in the future. So the next question I wanted to ask you is, in terms of new development, is more new developments to your product. I'm thinking of the nose device, the Conas. If you want to talk about this a tiny bit, as it is brand new.
Well, here it is. It's got two probes. It looks disgusting, doesn't it? Okay, and I'll stick it on my nose, and it really is disgusting. Okay, so this plugs in. Do you want me to see it? Want to see it on? Okay, so it plugs into the coronet here. Oops. So there it plugs in, and it literally, oh, I'll put it on. Just need to pull my hair out. Doesn't it look grand?
You wouldn't go walking in the street like that, that's for sure.
You don't need Christmas decorations when you've got this. So you can see that at the same time the lights are on, they're pulsing at 40 hertz. The nose device is pulsing as well. And so one wavelength is up one of the nostrils and the other wavelength is up the other. So I look gorgeous. Yep. Yeah, but it works. It's very funny when you turn all the lights out. It's particularly good. Okay, so it definitely makes a difference. I'm going to take this off now. Undo it. What we've certainly, I'm not initially I wasn't expecting much from it. I thought that what would happen is that over time there would be kind of just very subtle improvements, because most people using it have already been using the coronet, so there's quite a degree of neuroprotection that's been going on. One person commented within I think within a day of it that they noticed whenever they used the coronet, the thing up the nose with the coronet, they started yawning more. And you know, my ears pricked up at this, because there's another area of research going on in Parkinson's about the vagal nerve stimulation. And the vagus nerve is the thing that slows you down, slows your heart rate down, makes you yawn. So I thought, oh, this is pretty interesting. So it might be involved in vagal stimulation, which is, I think, from what the research is hinting at, going to be quite a good thing. So yes, apart from anything else, it adds to the fun and joy of the day when you get to have lights up your nose and on your head. It's really good.
Thank you, Catherine. Let's just look at some of the questions from our audience. I see that Liana is asking, does the light need to shine on the neuron intracranially, or is there a visual mechanism as well?
Does it need to shine on the eyes?
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yes. Is she
no,
asking, is it only through the cranium, or is it also through the visual contact with the light?
No, it's actually lights on the eyes, especially 670 nanometers, that visible red. That's a useful thing for something else. But there's research going on at University College London under Professor Glenn Jeffrey, showing that if you shine that wavelength on the eyes, you'll improve the health of the cells in the retina and reduce the severity of age-related macular degeneration. Other research has shown that diabetic retinopathy improves as well, but that's separate. The lights are on the head because remember that the lights can penetrate through the skull and through the meninges and into the outer part of the brain and shine directly on the brain. As well, you've got that indirect effect. And then you've got the mitochondria inside the cells that respond to those wavelengths and kickstart some action happening in the cell. So it's not a visual thing, not at all.
Thank you very much. Brian is asking, if he shaves his head, will the red light penetrate better?
Don't shave your head, darling. You want more of it. No, don't worry about it. It'll do fine. Besides which, you're just going to get more.
Good. Peter is asking if there are any actual or potential adverse side effects to the therapy.
No, it's been studied for a long time now, and there are no adverse effects, except the only side effect, as I've mentioned, that you might get a bit more hair growth. It's been used for quite a long time now as a treatment in head and neck cancers. When you have radiotherapy, because some of the cancers it's really difficult to operate on. And so they use radiotherapy, and of course that destroys the skin and causes huge dermatitis and those problems. So red light is used before radiotherapy and after sessions of radiotherapy to improve the healing and speed up the healing and reduce the destruction of the skin from the radiotherapy. Obviously, if it had caused an increase or return of the cancer, that would have been obvious by now, but it doesn't. In fact, when it comes to cancer, it's thought that what the lights do is give the cell the energy to do what it should have done in the first place. Cancer cells, any abnormal cell, there's a system in place for that cell to self-destruct. When cancer cells will lose that self-destruct mode, that's when they start spreading. So it does seem that the mitochondrial stimulation from the lights can give a boost to that cell so it wakes up its self-destruct mode and, does the deed. So it possibly can be quite helpful.
Thank you, Catherine. Gareth is asking if red light therapy interferes with deep brain surgery devices, with DBS.
No, not at all. I've got quite a few people who have had DBS or have DBS and still use it. Neither interferes with the other. They both completely ignore each other. They're very separate activities.
Good, thank you. That's great news. Chris is asking if you are familiar with the randomized trial that has been done in Spain in 2018 by Luis Santos and others.
Santos,
he's asking
yeah.
He's asking if there have been other human trials following that.
Yes, there have been some clinical trials, but most of them are quite small, and it's actually quite hard to do them because you think about if you want to do placebo controlled, it's very hard to have a placebo red light. So that's part of the problem. But the small trials have shown kinds of improvements that I've described. So yes, Santos looked at motor signs and showed that there definitely were. That was quite a short study, but others have shown non-motor improvements as well.
Thank you. Beverly is asking, how do you choose or make the most effective red light coronet? Is there an optimum technical specification for the product? So I guess if she's asking if she wanted to do her own or buy one, what is the optimal setup, the optimal technical setup for the product?
The optimum transcranial one for Parkinson's is the Coronet, because it's based on the research from the John Mitrofanos' team, showing that the 2 wavelengths in sequence has the best effect. But I tell people, if they're uncertain, the best way to do it is to make something themselves and just use red light that they buy on eBay. Just make sure that they choose red lead strips that's the darkest looking red that you can find, and then use the Cossack instructions on my blog, Red Lights on the Brain, and make a device. And then they can, while they're using that, then they can start thinking about, well, first, is this helping me? Is this making a difference? And the second one is, okay, do I really want to, buy something commercially, or shall I just keep going with what I've made?
Thank you, Catherine. There's a question from Peter, which I think I probably can answer myself. He's asking if PBM works better if you have short hair or are bald. I think we have answered that before. It is not dependent on your...
It probably does work a bit better, but really life is not about taking away your beautiful head of hair just to get lights on it. You know, so don't shave your hair off.
Peter is asking, how long does it take for the PBM to take effect to feel a difference coming from your following the therapy?
Because everyone's Parkinson's is different to everyone else's. So as I said, I've seen people have had immediate improvement, motor changes. One lady with an internal tremor, just the internal tremor stopped, you know, about halfway through. Other people, it's more subtle and it takes a bit longer. Yeah, a couple of weeks, you should start to see some improvements. But again, it depends on how your Parkinson's manifests. And it also depends on how good observers, you know, you have in your family. Often you yourself with Parkinson's, you're the worst person to actually make an assessment of whether something is working or not. And that's kind of part of the Parkinson's disease, which is a bit annoying.
That's very true. Edward is asking if there is published research on the light treatment, on the light therapy, and where can it be accessed?
Have a look at Red Lights on the Brain .blog because there's links to research articles there. I do need to do some more work on it. I've been a bit slack for a while.
Chris is asking if there is any downside to using the Coronet more than twice a day.
I have a few people who use it 3 times a day, but I suggest that twice is good. Some people are super sensitive. Not many, but the occasional one is. And you know, people who are very, very sensitive to medication might be also very responsive to the light. So people like that, I suggest that they just start once a day and maybe only a few minutes and then build up each week. But usually people will let me know. And so, you know, I'll talk to them about the best approach for them.
Thank you very much. David is asking if this would help wet and dry age-related macular degeneration.
Both.
Both of them.
Because it improves retinal cell health, yeah.
Thank you. Another totally different question from David again. He's asking, should I make one or should I purchase one from you? I guess both options are entirely available.
Yeah, both. Go for it. Make one and send me photos.
So, and if you want to make yours, then someone can follow the instructions on your blog, right? You explain there how to do it.
Yeah. There's a menu item at the DIY, and then there's a link to a video and instructions there. And if you're not sure, just contact me and I'll send you an email with lots of links on it so you can go straight through the stuff.
So Brian is asking a follow-up question on making your own. What does it cost to make your own device approximately?
Not much. You can buy a roll of dark red LEDs. We don't necessarily know the LED strip, 5-meter roll. A 12-volt DC is important. You can buy that for maybe $10, $20. Then you need a few connectors. Sometimes you get them with the LED strip. Otherwise, you need to go to an electronics store and buy bits and pieces that'll cost you maybe $2. You need a 12-volt DC power supply, which you've probably got at home anyway for other things that you've used in the past, and then plastic coated wire that you buy at a nursery or a hardware store, because that makes a great frame. Hang on, can you see that inside there, the plastic, so the wire, yeah, that kind of stuff. Plastic coated is really good because it's easy to use into shape. And then you just literally wrap the LED strip around. This is, if you look at the movie, you'll see Michael, who made this one, who makes things far more beautifully than I do. He's brilliant. So it's not expensive. Anything with LED strips, you should be able to make it for less than $50.
Oh wow, okay, that's quite affordable. Annie has a question about her own homemade helmet. She says that it has only a 670 wavelength and not 850, and she's asking whether it is pointless or whether it is still useful.
Is it pointless or is it
useful? Because her device works at 670.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yep, not very useful. That's what I started with, and that's what kind of got kickstarted this whole thing 7 years ago, which is I made just a one wavelength for red, a 670, and it made a difference in people with Parkinson's. And it was only when I started playing with other wavelengths, and then the Mitrofanus laboratory let me know that they'd experimented with the two and tried the two together, and then one on its own, other one on its own, and then out of curiosity they did one immediately followed by the other, and found that the last one worked the best. So you're still going to get benefit out of one wavelength, visible red. And if you're going to use just one wavelength, go for visible red. That's definitely the one to go for. Perfect.
A couple of questions from Crystalline, who is asking how long does the treatment last and what is the regimen? I guess she's asking for details of how many times a day, for how long, and for how long in your life you're doing this.
Right. Well, consider it the neuronal version of cleaning your teeth. You clean your teeth twice a day, at least. You use your lights twice a day.
Exactly. Peter is asking if it's possible to overdose on red light therapy. Have you had cases of people who've used it so much that they basically were overdosing?
Well, you don't know. You can have too much of a good thing. And the technical term is hormesis, which is, kind of, it's like the Goldilocks effect, I call it, where too little is no good. Too much is actually not going to harm you, but it's just going to reduce the effectiveness. And it kind of just right is just right. But defining just right is tricky because it also depends on the individual and their own sensitivity to the light.
That's very true.
So if if people just keep using light on their head all day, all it's going to do is make it less effective. It doesn't cause any adverse effects. It just undoes the good of using it more circumspectly.
On the same sort of topic, Mark is asking how long does the efficacy last if you have been using the red light hat, and if you stop at some point, how long would the efficacy be still felt?
One of my blokes that I regularly visit says 3 days. If he stops, then within 3 days he's noticed that he's lethargic, and that he hasn't got his kind of the apathy has returned, and he can't be bothered doing things. And it takes him a few days after starting the lights before he starts to get that back. So remember, it's like a battery recharge. The mitochondria, you recharge them, and so they're active and busy, and they're doing things. But if you don't keep giving them the light recharge and giving them that photonic energy, that the light is transferred into metabolic energy. It's absolutely fascinating stuff. If you don't keep doing that, then they're not going to work that well. It's a battery recharge model. So that means you keep going forever. I certainly will be. I don't have Parkinson's, but I use it because I think better and I feel better and I'm a nicer person.
Nice. Shoshana is asking whether the coronet also could help someone with traumatic brain injury on one hand and with sleep problems on the other hand.
Yes. Yeah, I've got a number of health professionals in Victoria who don't have Parkinson's and use the coronet for sleep problems. And I work with a number of people who've had traumatic brain injury. And yes, it can definitely help. Some people with TBI find that just the 670 nanometers is the best. And they like the feel of it. Theoretically, the two wavelengths in sequence should be more effective. But if someone says to me, I prefer the feel of just the one wavelength of just the visible red, you take notice of that, because that's if it feels okay, that's when people are going to use it. Comfort is very important.
Thank you. A specific question from Crystalline. She's asking how many minutes per session. I guess it is 24 minutes in 2 sessions of 12, if I remember well.
Yeah, the Coronet's 24 minutes. With anything you make yourself, 20 minutes, up to 30 minutes twice daily.
And then Peter is asking basically a question that may touch on your experience of having contact with people with Parkinson's. He's asking which other lifestyle factors or alternative approaches should be combined with PBM. He's suggesting, for instance, your diet, exercise, and others. And he's asking if there are things that you should not do with PBM.
With PBM or PD?
With red light. If you are using PBM photobiomodulation, would you recommend certain other things you can do together with this that you found were particularly successful?
Yeah, well,
you
you can live
exercise.
well. I think yes, exercise is a big thing. There's no doubt about that. That regular and the kind of exercise that Professor Bloom described, big, wide amplitude stuff, improves Parkinson's and is neuroprotective. So that's the big thing. Look, there are various diets around, and I really can't comment on them because I don't really know enough about them at all.
I just wanted to mention that actually we will have the pleasure of interviewing someone in your region at the start of next year, Professor Philip Matthews, who is basically a nutrition specialist focusing on keto diet and fasting.
Yes.
So for that last question, Peter, you'll be able to have some more insights pretty soon. So look, I think we have covered all the questions. It's a real pleasure to have, actually there is another one here from Chris. Let's just take this last one. This will be the last one. Chris is basically saying the smallpox patient example was exposed to red light for 24 hours a day. Do you think it would have been more effective if the person had been exposed to less than 24 hours? And would that be different with the coronet? So do you have a view on overexposure or the benefits of less exposure?
Yeah, I think in the 1895 example, it was more avoidance of sunlight and artificial lights was a critical thing. So the light level, the red lights that Niels Svensson created was very low powered, and of course it was not on the person's head; it was in the room. But they didn't really get much illumination from it. So it was a very low dose. So you can't really compare the transcranial lights and that situation.
So Catherine, thank you very much for this update. It's a real pleasure to have picked up on the previous interview. As I said, it was hugely successful with the thousands of views and to be able to basically help people progress in their understanding of red light therapy and how it can help them. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for building up such a useful device for the PWT community.
Thank you.
Speak to you soon.
Go well.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day or good evening.